Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Wandering Road podcast. I'm your host, Chris, alongside my co host, Dean. And for today's show, we have a guest for you today, and I'm super excited to have him on the show. I came across Riley on TikTok. His TikTok page has exploded recently with his takes on his paranormal experiences. Riley, welcome to the show. We're glad to have you on here, man.
Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate it. Thank you guys so much.
What we usually do, I mean, if you're a new listener, and this is also for Riley as a new guest, what we kind of like to do is kind of build the foundation for the discussion. So, what's your background? Where do you hail from? What are some of the most interesting things that happened to you at a young age that might have sparked your interest in the paranormal? Any personal experiences or things you saw? Like, how did you get into it? Yeah, just what's your background?
Well, I was born in Heidelberg, Germany. My father was in the military. So, we moved all over the country, moved all over the place. There's not been a place called home. The spiritual thing I didn't find out was a generational thing until later on in my life. But my first experience was at my aunt's house in Oceanside. And the house that she lived at was, she said, built over burial grounds, the whole community, the whole neighborhood. And so when I was 5, my first encounter actually happened in the garage. I actually shared this on TikTok. I saw this entity that had hooves and horns, and it was smoky, and it had wings and red eyes. And it was coming towards me when I was 5 years old in the garage. And so after that, I started having more encounters in every place I moved to. So it just didn't stop until I was like 13 or 14.
If you don't mind, Riley, why don't we just do a deep dive in there, starting from your earliest paranormal experience? So you said you saw that demonic creature. What happened after that point?
I saw things starting to come into my room. After that, we found out that house had vortexes, portals for spirits to come in and out of. This was confirmed by multiple shamans, witches, priests try to come and bless this house and close these portals down, these vortexes, and nothing worked. Like, genuinely nothing worked for this house. So when I was a child, after that, I got grounded one time. I don't remember why, but I saw a red orb come into my room. And then I was on the bed doing shadow puppets on the wall. Because when you're a kid, we didn't have iPads. I'm 30 years old. We don't have iPads. You had to come up with your own entertainment. And what happened was I saw something impress into the bed. And then I saw another hand start making puppets next to mine. And so I ran out of the room. After we moved out of that house, we moved to Michigan. We lived there for about 6 years. And I had a lot of paranormal experiences there. Man, guys, the stuff I saw as a child, because I didn't know how to shut this stuff off. I would see an old man standing in our doorway. Come to find out, our landlord's father died in that house, but they didn't tell us he died until after we moved out. So I started seeing stuff from 5 to 13 is really when I just had so many paranormal experiences. I don't even know where to start.
And I want to go back real quick. I don't want to gloss over it because it's such a stark example of a first time experience. Because we've talked to people before, they share their first experiences in the paranormal. They're usually almost always interesting. Yours is very pronounced in a way that what you saw and also how old you were. The reason why I find that interesting and I want to revisit it is because you talked in specific detail about what you saw and the fact that you were that young and you remember that vivid detail at that age. If you were to go back without, inciting any type of stress or anything like that, if you were to psychoanalyze that situation from when you were a kid, did you ever think back on that? Like, what do you think was going on there? Like, what do you think you were seeing? What was the entity doing? Was it paying attention to you? Was it just off in the ether doing its own thing? Like, what's your analysis or perspective on that whole thing that happened to you at 5 years old?
Well, when I was 5, nobody was inside the house. And come to find out, there was a massive vortex in the garage. The biggest one was actually in the garage. And as a child, if I were to look at the child, I would believe the child, because kids, we have imagination, but then there's just some things we can't make up. We can't. I wasn't exposed to horror movies. I wasn't exposed to any of that stuff because I would get nightmares. That wasn't something allowed for us to watch. So if your child is sitting here saying, "Oh, I see something," believe it. because most times at the age of 5, people come into their spiritual abilities. They start having a lot of experiences at the age of 5. So if I was looking back, I would just be like, well, yeah, I believe it because, I have my aunt who confirmed it with multiple people who have decades of spiritual experience confirming that there is in fact something in that garage, and they all don't know each other, but they all experienced it. So for a child, yeah, I would be like, yeah, I believe you.
Do you remember that thing being malevolent towards you? Did it have any like malice towards you, or was it kind of just like a
I
third
don't-
party perspective thing where it was just doing its own thing?
it basically blocked out the corner of the garage, and it turned and looked at me, and it was walking toward me, but like Nightcrawler, you know how he would poof and disappear. That's what it was doing.
Oh,
And so after that, I don't know if it attached itself to me. I have no clue. But it was walking toward me. As a 5-year-old, I slammed the
yeah.
door and I ran as
Yeah.
far as I could.
Right.
Smart kid.
Yeah.
um, one more thing I want to ask, because before we hopped on the call, you talked a little bit about what you're doing now with your life, which, you're studying psychology and law and stuff like that. Because you were also saying that like a kid at that age tends to come into becoming more aware of paranormal stuff. And that's interesting. So if you can mesh the two, right? So you've studied psychology, you've studied the paranormal, you've had experiences in both. In your opinion, how often do kids see strange things like that at that age? And why is that? Like, why is it 4 or 5 that you start becoming aware, more sensitive, even more sensitive than adults to paranormal? And then also answer, if you can, like maybe why does that go away over time?
So between the ages of 1 to 7, that's the time you're being socialized into the world. You're listening to your parents. And so 5 is kind of like that age where you're still young enough to where you're not fully socialized, and you don't
Sweet
have
spot. Yep.
people telling you what you are seeing, what you're not seeing, because all of us have had some sort of experience. We're all born with these abilities, but depending on how we are socialized by our parents, that's when we start actually doing repression and suppression of what we experience. So after 5 years old, typically for 95% of people, it tends to kind of go dormant around 7, 8, and you don't really have these experiences. But, when you're reading ancient texts, they tell you that kids are the closest to God for a reason because they're innocent, they're pure, they see the world alive. They have more of that Native American thinking where every object's alive, everything's alive to them. So they don't have a filter, they don't have a bias over their eyes. So at the age of 5, they're old enough to be like, okay, I can see the world for what it is at 5 years old. And that's when our memories start actually, we can start remembering things around 5. Anything before that, it's still a little iffy, it's still a little washy. But 5 is like you said, that sweet spot for kids. And they just see it because they're innocent. They don't have limits like our parents told us what to believe in, what not to believe in, what to do, what not to do. They're still very young. They're still learning, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, yes, sir, no, sir. It's very simple for kids. But after a certain age, that just starts to change just because of being socialized.
I have never heard anyone put it so eloquently about how children at that age have no filter. It's something that's obvious, right? It's one of those things in life where it's like, okay, well, if you spend 2 seconds thinking about it, it's like, of course, children don't have that filter put on them because they don't have the experiences in the world yet. But the way you emphasized it, I think, is worth revisiting. It's very important to say that when you have spirituality and paranormal experiences, and you have a human being who doesn't have an exposure to regular life, 3-dimensional space, human life, all that stuff that is largely separate from the spiritual world, then I think that goes back to what you were saying about how they're closer to the spiritual side, like inherently at that age. It's like it's a natural thing. So I have a daughter who's 4 years old. Last night, like literally, I'm not even exaggerating. This just happened last night. We were all eating dinner in the kitchen, and she goes off to the bathroom to rinse her hands off, go to the bathroom. And then we all hear, like, we're just quiet in the kitchen. We hear in the distance, she just goes, "Oh, hi." And I'm like, oh shit. I'm like, who is she talking to? Why did she say that? There's either a prowler in the house or she's seeing something that she shouldn't be seeing, or like, it's an imagination thing. And so when she comes back in the room, I'm like, who were you talking to? And she's just like, she didn't say anything. She was just like smiling. The reason I bring that up is because like I'm just joking around in a way, but like I'm postured as an adult or as a parent with a child around that age, like ready. I'm so ready to start postured to see when this stuff is going to happen if it happens. But
She's so innocent. So she's just seeing it, and they love kids. Kids are like, you guys know Monsters Inc., right? Where they go and they're
Yep.
targeting kids, they're
Mhm,
targeting
mhm.
teenagers. They're targeting children for a reason, because children believe, and when you believe, you see. Okay? So she probably is seeing something. So encourage her to like draw what she saw, or because once you start saying you didn't see that, or that's not real, then what it'll start shutting everything off. That's what it does, because our parents were old school. They're like, you didn't see that, you
Yeah.
didn't.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
and it's like, but it is, because all these children go on TikTok. They'll be like, look, it's grandma and grandpa right there. Look, it's Uncle Sam. Look, it's
Yeah.
and you're like,
Yeah.
how do
Yeah.
you know? How do you know these people? They passed on before you were even born, but they
Yeah. I
see
come
them.
from a mixed background, and no, you
Yeah.
didn't.
Right. Even stories from adults that happen at the end of someone's life, like in hospice. My grandfather, one of the coolest stories, or like the most interesting stories I always revisit in my mind when we touch on stuff like this, is I wasn't there for this because I was in high school at the time. I was away. One of the stories my family told me was he kept saying like, "Oh, I see I think what was it's like Pup and Quig or Pap and Quig or something like that." So he was talking about his brother-in-law and his father, and he was seeing them in the corner of the room. And my grandfather was like 80 something at the time when he passed away. So my family reported this, like, oh, like, he saw someone in the corner of the room, like in his, I know you can go back and say like, oh, well, he was, his neurons were firing and he was hallucinating or something. But I do think that like there's a nexus at the beginning of life and there's a nexus at the end of life. I don't know if that resonates with you, Riley, at all. I bring that up because I think it's a good talking point when it comes to like how we're innocent in the beginning of life. We don't see things from the human perspective, but when we get to the end of our life, we also have something kind of like unique and special from that perspective that none of the three of us being in our 30s have experienced yet. So that's just, yeah.
That's because, like, when you're at the end, like, think of it like this: a lot of people have things happening to them when they sleep, when they're lucid. Okay, because our conscious minds are sitting here focusing on trying to filter all this information. Our subconscious is doing all of that. So when you're toward the end, the veil is thinner, because you can't put up a fight like you once did before. You're starting to transition over. So like you said, from children to adolescents to teenagers, they're transitioning from the spiritual to the physical. But toward the end, it's from the physical back to the spiritual, and it's a cycle that just restarts. So it does happen. Like my stepfather, he's dying. He's blind, paralyzed on one side, can't feel, can't move, can't he doesn't have his senses, but he was a skeptic, and he would hear a woman whispering in his ear. He would see things, and he's blind. He would see entities in our house, and he was blind. So, it's just like these things exist. And when he's especially transient, sometimes he's here, sometimes he's not, because of the way his brain is now. But it just happens. And, it surprises me that people are skeptics when this is happening all the time. Like, there's so many reported experiences on this. And then you got people that are just simply non-believers.
I've come across my fair share of people like that as well. Well, you'll talk to them and it's like, well, this weird thing happened, but it's all just coincidence. Maybe it was just a house settling. Maybe it's like a gas leak. The more you push people to talk about this type of topic, you'll get some really asinine answers. They'll just
Mhm.
pull shit out of their ass. They'll be like super disingenuous. But Riley, I wanted to circle back to your paranormal experiences for a second, if you don't mind. You said through age 5 to 13 is where you kind of had your crescendo of experiences. You
Mhm.
mind sharing some in particular that you thought were just really creepy or like really unexplainable? And on top of that, did you ever share this with your parents and did they believe you? Because I know I've had personal situations where if you've seen my videos on my TikTok page about my stories, I really wasn't believed until someone experienced it with me.
The old man in the house was something that I experienced from the time I was 9 to 12, 10 to 12. We lived there for a few years. My stepfather, the one I'm telling you who was seeing and hearing stuff, he was the skeptic. He was the one saying that didn't happen. That's not real. He would actually get mad at my mom if we talked about these things because he didn't want us to get scared, but it just kind of made it worse because then now we can't talk about it, but here we are experiencing it. And so, it was getting so bad to a point where we would walk around the house, check all the windows, lock all the doors. And my parents even tried making up monster spray to help, but it didn't help because I was still seeing the old man standing at the door, just looking at me. And we couldn't close our bedroom doors when we were kids. We weren't allowed. So it was just like every night for a year, I would see this entity, come and go. And it took a cross. I actually have the cross that we use. It took a cross to kind of calm down the activity in that house. And then it stopped at 13 because I talked to my aunt about this, and she's been my spiritual advisor ever since, my spiritual mentor. And she taught me how to close off my abilities because I don't know if you guys seen Doctor Sleep. Have you seen that movie?
Yeah, that's a great one.
Okay, so they say that when he was a little boy in The Shining, the reason why he was seeing everything is because he was like a million volt battery in that building that had all these entities. And when you're so open like he was, it's going to draw all these things to you. And so that's why you have to learn to close off your abilities like he does in Doctor Sleep. So that way he's not sitting here attracting things with his shining, with his light. And so that's why it stopped at 13. I still see him and hear him. If I like decide to turn on my abilities at any time, I can still see and hear. But it's not something I want to do because I enjoy the peace of not seeing and hearing them, because once you turn it on, it's like moths to a flame. And the brighter the light, the darker the shadows that show up. And that's just how it is for people who have these kinds of abilities.
I'm in the position where I'll hear things and I'll see like shadows in my peripheral. And
Mhm.
I'll do like a double take and it's like, oh shit, is something there? I'll just be like, okay, maybe it was just one of the cats that that walked by, because when you grow up with stuff like that, it's like, I don't want to deal with this again
Mhm.
as an adult, because you're very aware of your surroundings. You have so much going on, and it's like, I just don't want to deal with it. One thing I did want to ask you, so you mentioned earlier something about a generational experience. You mind going into a deeper dive about that?
Yeah, so my great grandmother, I think, my great great, you get confused after the greats. She was a holy woman, but she fought off dark witchcraft. Okay, and so we think that
And
my
I
mom,
apologize for cutting you off. Was this in the United States or was this
I
in
think it was in
another?
Mexico. It's kind of, I haven't gotten all the details because that's not something I don't ask all the details on. I just
Right.
list the main parts of the story. But she I think it was Mexico, I think. But she would, she was a very holy woman and fought off these dark witches. It's, there's really dark witchcraft in Mexico. And so she did that. And we think that there's either a generational curse put on us, or something that's attached to our bloodline, because the men in our family have abilities too. It's not any sex, it's everybody that's a descendant of this bloodline. So this is something that's been going on for like a very long time with us. So we think that's probably why it started with her, or probably went past her, but we don't really know. But I know it started with her so far, and then it's just moved its way down. We're given abilities by God to see the evil, and to fight evil. That's why we have them. They're gifts, and people see them as curses. Not everybody is chosen to see what's going on behind the veil. And my grandmother was one of them, and then we all are too. So that's just, I didn't talk about this stuff for a long time because people think it's just a bunch of woo woo, and it's
That's
not.
true.
It's very real. It's very real, the stuff we've witnessed and seen.
Yeah, it took me about, what was it, Dean? 30 plus years to actually come out and say something about my paranormal experiences. 34 now. We started the podcast, what, dude, 2 years ago?
Yeah.
So it was last year I actually did my own episode, and I went on other shows and just finally let it out there. And I can't tell you how much, I'm sure you feel the same way. It's a relief just, just putting it out there and seeing all these people when you did on TikTok, all these, including myself, just flock to you. Like you said, it's really difficult to talk about because everybody will just call you crazy. Because
The
if,
world's crazy.
yeah,
The world,
because
truth
the
is
world,
stranger than fiction. So it wasn't that because they will call you crazy, but it wasn't
right.
really that. It's because I find my spiritual experiences to be more sacred.
Mhm.
And as guys, we don't really share what we practice, what we believe in. We don't talk about that stuff. That's very, very sacred to men. And I was just like, you know what, I'm so tired of people, paranormal investigators, for example, going and stirring the pot in these places and making it worse. They don't realize what they're doing because everything's connected and it has a ripple effect that affects all of us, whether people want to believe that or not. All of us are connected somehow. Like you just said it, 2 years ago you started this podcast, and here we are. We cross paths because we're in that alignment. Everything's connected, whether people want to believe that or not.
That's what terrifies me about life, honestly, is we're sitting here, we're talking to each other, we have this presumed free will, right? We think that we have these decisions we can make, but at the very core of the operations of the universe around us, when we have these weird occurrences, we have these things that line up that just don't seem like they could be random occurrences. Like if you're walking down the street and then some napkin just blows in your face and you're having a bad day, you could say, oh, that's the universe. Like, the things are playing out like it's making my day worse. It's negative energy. But really, just a napkin blowing in your face can happen to anybody. Good day, bad day. But then there are some things that are happening in life to us every day, everybody, not every day, sometimes, where it's just like you look up at the stars and you're like, really? The odds of that happening to me or somebody I know, with the conjunction of other forces around me, you analyze it as a supposed free conscious free will, and you're just like, holy shit, like there's no way this is random.
Now,
And
the universe don't believe in
yeah,
coincidence. That's something man has made, synchronicity, something man has made just to
mm,
explain what happens to us. Things happen to us because we vibrate at that energy. Whether
right,
people,
right. Yeah.
so like, we're vibrating at the same energy right now. We're talking to each other, and that's how we've crossed paths. Now, you have free will. Like I could have said, no, I don't want to come talk to you guys, or you guys could have not invited me on. That's your free will. But I mean, in a way, we were going to cross paths because we were vibrating the same thing. So people choosing what they want to feel and what they believe in alters their path. It's kind of fated, like you said. You have free will, but it's fated for that napkin to come in your face. Now, if you're in a good mood and that napkin came in your face, you would laugh. If you're in a bad mood and
Yeah.
that napkin came in your face, you'd be like, woe is me. So it's
Yes.
it's kind of like one of those things. I think it's a beautiful thing that we can just experience it at all.
Before I flip it back to Chris, I have to ask you, what do you think though is going on with the conscious versus the subconscious? And this is the reason I ask you is twofold. The first one is you're a psych major, so you have some fresh ideas and some fresh knowledge to add to this. But the second one is, if we do have things happening in our lives that are either predestined or they're free will based, and some people would argue that you cannot have both in the same reality. Some people would say no, you can. But what I'm really getting after, my question is, if you have these things popping into your mind and your awareness that, oh, I can either take this as a good thing or a bad thing, but you also have a feeling of negativity or positivity at your core, right? And I
Mm.
would call that maybe kind of like subconscious. I don't know if it's the same thing, but there's clearly a different section of our personage, like our personal being, that's separate from reality, separate from our consciousness, that is also experiencing things. And I
Mhm.
know this is getting really like in the weeds and kind of heavy, but like I have to ask you, Riley, like what do you think about that? Like what do you think about the fact that when we're walking through our lives, we're having experiences, there might be some things that are in our conscious awareness that we act on, whether it's free will based or whatever, but there's also interventions from an outside perspective that affect us on a deeper, like a deeper level. And that goes back to the, like what you were saying about how like, oh, we had a feeling whether or not we wanted to invite you on. You had a feeling whether or not you wanted to actually do this podcast, and that might not be tapped into your current consciousness, your awareness, but you still made the decision and you still listened to that subconsciousness.
Mhm.
So I know that was a lot, but I
Yeah.
hope that made sense. But like, do you have anything to add to that or build on that?
So, people need to understand psyche doesn't just mean mind. Psyche means mind, spirit, soul. And they changed that 150 years ago for psychology because a lot of people who were in it at that time were philosophers and physiologists. And they can't really prove the spirit or the soul. And it's that time where we were getting out of religion and kind of going into the Enlightenment era, into the Industrial Revolution. So we're more focused materially. That's why behaviorism really succeeded in America during that time. Now, back like it's all really interesting science. Our conscious, think of it like this: our conscious mind, you and I talking right now, the information you're processing is equivalent to a floppy disk. A floppy disk, like 52, like megabytes or something like that. Whereas our subconscious is a super quantum computer. We don't know what's going on down there. It's while I'm talking to you guys right now, it's coming up with responses, a trillion and infinite amount of responses just to say something back to me, while like in seconds. That's how it works, and it's so deep, it's so vast. We don't know what's in there. If you think about it, you close your eyes, it's a finite space, but it's infinite. You can think of anything. You can come up with anything. Like, where is it coming from? And so I think people need to understand it's so deep. I bet you guys have had thoughts, right? Where you're like, you thought of this invention or this idea, and then you saw somebody else say it that you don't even know. And it's like, well, then that's something coming from the collective. That's something coming, that's a seed that needs to emerge so that way we can move forward. Because you'll see that in society. You'll see, if you look at inventions of the past, you had people from one part of the planet have the same invention as someone else from the other side, because it was the collective's time to bring that into the material and move us forward. And that's how it's,
Dude.
and we don't study it because we're too ego based. We're like, we can't prove what's going on down there. It's not like as physical as this book. It's not as physical as the headphones you guys are wearing. So it's like, we ain't going to touch it. We're just going to kind of work with the symbols and whatever comes up with the woo woo, and that's just how, we are today.
You're the first person that I think we've ever talked to on this podcast who has brought up the same concept that I've also concluded on in the past, which is our subconscious is essentially the most complex supercomputer that we ever have known. I mean,
Mhm.
aside from the possibility that we might achieve, general whatever GDI, AI, whatever, that's not even here yet. But as far as we know it, the human subconscious is so deep and so powerful just for the sheer fact that we only use 10% of our brain at a time. And I want to clarify real quick because like people say like, oh, we only use 10% of our brain total. No, what that really means is we only utilize 10% of our brain at one given time. So there's at any given time, there's 90% of computing power that is not tapped by our conscious awareness or subconscious, like, our physiological operations, like our heart beating and our breathing and all that stuff. But there's still like 90% that is untapped at any given time. And I am totally with you. Like I finally met somebody who has drawn the same conclusion that I have, which is if we are sleeping or if we are not paying attention, our conscious awareness might be operating at a level, at a quantum level, that our consciousness is not aware of. And
Right.
sometimes, for some reason, there might be some calculations, there might be some perceptions or awarenesses that slip over to our conscious awareness that we can't possibly compute by ourselves at our conscious selves, but we can understand the basic concept. And I honestly think that there's something with that when it comes to precognition or random occurrences that don't seem like they're random occurrences. Like, you suddenly have an idea pop in your head. Let's say you have a quote from your favorite TV show. Oh, XYZ, like, I love that, that's a funny quote. And then like a week goes by, and then you go watch like some episodes of something, but you don't even know that that quote is from that show you're going to watch. You watch that show, and then you see that quote, and you're like, holy shit, like, I just thought about that quote like a week ago, but I don't remember it being from this show that I haven't watched in like 10 years, yet I found a way to it.
Your subconscious like a river, right? That's flowing with information. And think of your conscious mind as a boat. Your subconscious is directing that boat. So if you're trying to reprogram yourself, because people try, they're like, well, I'm wealthy, I'm healthy, I'm this, I'm that. You can say that all you want when you're in the boat. But if the river ain't going with you and flowing with you in that direction, it's not going to work. And so people have to work with the subconscious and go deeper. And it's very hard because people don't know how to do that, but we're figuring it out, like the law of attraction, the law of manifestation, all this stuff. It doesn't work because people don't have the river in sync with the boat. So people are always working against themselves because they have deeper programs at play that they need to go in and figure out how to get rid of it. And they do that through awareness and observation and writing everything out. Writing helps. But yeah, you're right. The subconscious is beyond powerful. When we go to sleep and we have dreams, we're not dreaming of what we're doing right now. We're dreaming in symbols. We're dreaming in strange things because that's our way. That it's like a movie. Think of your subconscious playing a movie for you. And it's like, you need to look at these things. Like, these nightmares could be trauma related. When you have a good dream, it could be something like, oh, there's an emotional connection. But symbols is how we communicate, because a symbol tells you more than words. So look at a cross, right? When you see a cross, you're like, the whole history, Jesus died for our sins, this is when it happened. You can look at it and actually see it's actually an icon, not a symbol, but you can look at it and see the story, see the history. That's what our dreams are trying to do for us through symbols, though. And we have to decipher what our subconscious is trying to tell us.
If you take that perspective that you just gave us, which was very in-depth, how would you apply that to your personal stories of paranormal experiences? Because it seems to me that you're much more intricately aware of what's possible at least at the, you're 30 years old. At this age right now, in your 30s, you have the perfect compilation of experiences, intelligence, knowledge, and personal perspective. To me personally, my 30s are the most enlightened period in my life because I have family, I have personal experiences, I have professional experiences, etc. And those all come to a head for me personally, that I feel like I'm the most lucid that I've ever been. But if you take that concept and you reapply it to your previous paranormal experiences, how would you rectify those previous experiences? Would you say that there's something more to them, or would you just take them for face value? But like, can you give us an example of like how you would fit that into your narrative?
So, like, if I'm 30 looking back when I was like 9 or 10 and seeing that old man, I would be like, this child is having this experience. There's something going on with this child. Now, granted, when children go through stress, that people don't realize stress or things that induce that type of environment also make you more susceptible because your psyche is essentially disassociating. And so, as a child, when you go through trauma or stress, you disassociate, and that leaves room. It's like a spiritual gap that leaves room for entities to try to talk to you, to try to get in your mind. And so, as a child, we were going through a difficult time. It was a little stressful for me as a kid, but in a way that makes sense why I was seeing things more, because I was at a lower vibrational frequency to see these things. I mean, as a child, I look back, it's not, I can evaluate it deeper now as an adult. But as a child, I would be still seeing it as face value.
What you just said there makes complete sense. But there was something that you said early on in the show that I've kind of latched onto, but I can't let go in my mind. And it's about paranormal investigators. When I was
Right.
younger, I was a huge fan of Ghost Adventures with Zach Bacon.
Right.
Yeah. So you said something that I find very interesting in that paranormal investigators, though they're trying to capture evidence, some of them might cause more harm than actual good. What are your thoughts on them in general? What are your thoughts on people like Zach Bagans? And I know you posted a few videos of you visiting the museum if you want to get into that a little bit.
It's hard for me to say because I have to be a healthy skeptic. With Zach Bagans, for example, I've heard some things about him. That museum, though, that house is evil. Maybe if some people say the objects are fake, but there's something definitely in the house for sure. But paranormal investigators, they're more eager to try to get something up on YouTube to try to be like, oh, this is what we did. We caught this evidence. Like, this is, and they always say demon house, demonic entities, blah, blah, blah. We've been scratched or blah, blah, blah. And then you watch it and it's like, where's the scratch? Where's this demonic entity? What are you seeing? And we just spent an hour of our life watching them just sit here and not just kind of, in my opinion, it's more like fluff, but like they're asking for information. They get in contact and then they jump and they get scared and then they run away. And it's like, you went there, now you're in fear, now you're feeding these things. And most hauntings aren't demonic. So when they say, oh, it's a demon house or it's demonic or blah, 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 like, no, majority of hauntings are just really angry people. Really angry people. I mean, we're scared of people for a reason. We're scared of what they can do. So, I mean, imagine them as a spirit who's being misunderstood or something in the house triggered them to wake up. But these people, they go and then they kick up the dirt. And then they're like, we caught all these things, but there's never anyone with them that blesses these places. I'm sorry, if you're scared the whole time, you don't have the spiritual oomph to sit there and bless a place. You just don't. You sat there and fed it the entire time. If you aren't scared, it'd be easier. But they go, they feed these things. And, it's more, in my opinion, an illusion fed to the families that's it's all been taken care of. And that's what I see them as, is people like kind of giving the illusion like, oh, everything's fine. We took care of it. We believe you. But again, the power of the mind is pretty strong. I mean, in my opinion, these people, most of them I think are just fake. That's just me. Like Zach Bagans, there's something about that guy. I don't really care for that guy, but whatever's in that house is real. And I saw it with my own eyes.
A bit. What did you see while you went through there?
At the time, I was the cripple in the back. I was on a cane. So I saw originally when we were walking down the hallway, as soon as we started, this cloaked, hooded figure in the corner of my eye, kind of walking parallel with me through one of the doors. But I was like, like you said, a shadow in the corner of my eye, trick of the lighting, could be something. And then we get to the stairs part, and it's pretty steep, like the old school stairs. We get to the stairs part, and I was like halfway through the stairs while the group already moved through this maze-like room and was already heading down the hall. So I took my time because I needed a break. Them stairs were rough for my knees. So I was looking around in this clown-themed room, and then it showed up again. This cloaked entity just walked right across, right through, and it was like 7 or 8 feet tall. It was huge. And it didn't do anything to me. It didn't lunge at me. It just walked right in front of me. And then I just picked up my cane and I ran. My ex-wife was like, what's wrong? What's wrong? I'm like, I saw this thing, but I told her afterwards, like after we left. And then come to find out, there are other people in my comments who said they've seen the same exact hooded cloaked figure. And then a documentary on Zach Bagans' That House, he said there's a cloaked hooded figure that people have been seeing. And I didn't see that until like 4 years after the fact. I don't watch his documentaries too much. So when I saw it 4 years later, I was like, whoa, I'm not the only one who has seen this thing. I've never seen this documentary before, but that's trippy that I saw the same thing that's in that house. Whatever it is, whatever's in there, it's not right.
I think it's one of those things where that thing knows that you can see it, and it's
Hmm.
like, hey, I'm just letting you know I'm here, type of
Yeah,
thing. Yeah,
it did for sure. And I went in as a healthy skeptic. I just got out of the Marines. It was a little honeymoon gift because, it's Zach Bagans. Like, how am I supposed to believe he was the guy I grew up watching, sitting here
right.
intimidating a ghost and then running away like a little kid? So it was like when I found out he was collecting all this stuff, I was like, cool, why not? Let's just go. It's a few miles from the house. It's cheap. We'll go, we'll bring protection for ourselves, we'll do whatever necessary just in case. But I doubt that there's something in this house. That's like the thinking I went in with. I didn't go in like, oh, I'm pumped, I'm supercharged. Like, no, I went in with total doubt, like that anything would
Right.
actually
Yeah, there's another question that I got for you that just popped up in my head, and they're kind of controversial now. But what are
happen.
your thoughts on the Warrens? Kind of like the OG demonologists. I know Dean and we did an episode like a while ago covering some of their cases, and there were some situations where the families that were involved with the Warrens kind of said, we didn't want them to go to the media. They went to the media. Kind of the stuff they said that happened was kind of a little exaggerated. But what are I'm more of a camp of like, they were more helpful than detrimental, because I think without them, we don't have like the massive, or maybe I could be wrong. Someone else could have came on the scene, like this massive outburst of like paranormal and demonology and all that stuff. I mean, we had Father Malachi Martin.
It's good and bad. You're going to hear good and bad things about these people. And when you read their book, The Demonologists, they talk about when they come across evil or something demonic, they want to keep their distance. I mean, when you do come across something very malevolent, you don't want to entangle yourself with it. Now, if it was for the media or whatever their intentions were, I can't speak on that. I can't speak on it because it's hearsay. He said, she said, and people have different perspectives than we do looking back, but I definitely think that they have opened up a type of path, like you said, where people like myself have someone we can connect to, because Lorraine Warren, I do believe she had these abilities. I genuinely do. Now I
I
don't
do as
know.
well.
Now it's just like one of those things where you're going to hear both good and bad. And if they did both good and bad, then that's just based off the evidence we've been given. And then what we decide is what we decide. But I think, like you said, I think the good about it is that they did open up some doors for people like myself and others to get into the paranormal investigations. Because they were like, they were on Penn State Paranormal. You remember that show? Penn State?
I do. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that guy, I think he got in trouble for something. I think he's in jail or something like that.
Right.
But
Yeah.
but I definitely think because something attached to him, something evil attached to him. I've heard so many stories where people have come across this stuff and they've taken a dark path because they've come across entities that have gotten into their minds. But I definitely think the Warrens, whether good or bad, I think it's a bit of both, honestly.
I got a couple more questions for you, Riley, and then I'll kick it over to Dean. Um, what are your thoughts on the demonic in general? Because you run into, like you said, you run into a lot of people. They're like, oh, this is demonic. That's demonic. And you even run into denominations of Christianity that are like, that's not, demons don't exist.
Mhm.
So, like, what are your thoughts on the concept of the demonic in general?
When you read about demons and you read about myths in general, all the old gods become the devils to the new religion. Every single one. So, like, you look at the pantheon of Rome and Greece, and then all of them have become demons and devils, and it's devil worship to the new faith, right? And then this faith is going to be the demon or devil to the next faith. We hear it with our this generation today, like, oh, Christianity, Catholicism, all these faiths are inherently evil because they're telling you what you can and can't do and how you should treat people, and So we're seeing that transition of old gods becoming new devils. Now, for demons or demonic entities, when I say demonic, I'm talking about things that have just intent for malice, intent for destruction. And they do exist. Okay. When you read about the cases in the hostage to the devil, there are multiple witnesses seeing what's going on, seeing it happen. That's abnormal. That's beyond the scope of normal behavior in that moment. Psychologists, they use psychiatrists to try to disprove it, to see if there's anything going on. And then when they can't, that's when an exorcism happens. And so there is, a battle of the spirits. Definitely. You have things that are created in this world to sway us to do bad. And you have things in this world to sway us to do good, the little angel and devil on our shoulders. But these entities do exist. Now, is everything demonic? Every single house? No. But if there's a lot of dark energy like suffering or trauma or death that happened, it does open portals. It does open gateways for other things to come through and other things to feed off of it. But it doesn't mean it's like Baal or Belial or Azazel or, if you were a demon, like a powerful one, would you mess with the small fish or would you go for world leaders? That's why I'm like, I don't, they have their offspring, right? That walk this earth and they're trying to possess us and everything like that. From the book of Enoch, it's their children, the Nephilim, that are the ones trying to possess us. But to come across them, genuinely, even priests, they're out of 3,000 cases from 1968 to 1974, they only believed 4 cases out of 3,000 were in fact demonic possessions. That's 0.13%. So that's why I laugh when I'm like, you guys aren't coming across demons. You're coming across angry human spirits. That's what you're coming across most times. Because it's that's why I'm a healthy skeptic. You know what I'm saying? Because I don't believe that every single house, statistically speaking, is demonic and evil. And it's just angry freaking people that died in that house or something traumatic happened and they want retribution.
I completely agree with you in the sense that not everything could potentially be demonic. You could have residual hauntings, you could have angry spirits, trauma, or emotion that's just trapped in that home based off of what happened in the past. And my other question that I have for you is, so I grew up in a haunted home from age 9 to about 17. And there were certain things that happened that were physical, and certain things presented itself to my sister, and certain things came to my mom in dreams, because my mom is a devout Catholic, strong in her faith, and she's a fighter. She's one of those that no, you're not going to mess with my kids. We're going to go to spiritual warfare. I wanted your opinion in that type of situation that I grew up in that quick summary that I gave you. Do you think that's an angry spirit or something?
When you're teenagers, was your sister a teen going through this
No,
too?
she was at the height of innocence, so she would have been 4 or 5 years old when we moved into there.
And
And
then by the time you got out, she was 13, 14.
about 12 years old, I'd say.
So you have a boy going through puberty, and then you have a girl that's in her innocence that's going through changes as well. And then you have your mom who's religious. They like religious people because religious people, they like to test their faith. They like a girl who's of innocence. And then you're a boy going through all these emotional changes. So it's like a perfect combination of things that could trigger up something up in the house. I've read stories where there'd be nothing happening in this house. And then it'd be let's say it was a haunting from the 1900s, and it was a mom with this older son and a daughter. And then nothing happens all the way until you guys move in, right? And then it's oh, well, we're interlinked energetically. We have that same vibration. Can stir things up.
Now, my dad was there too, but he never really. He was a proverbial machismo. He doesn't want to deal with the spirituality bullshit.
Well, and it's if you have that dynamic, right? And that dynamic existed before you moved in that house, and it just wasn't active because no one was that type of dynamic before they moved in. You know what I'm saying? then nothing probably happened. But if it starts like manifesting itself, it's feeding off of somebody. Somebody's giving it this kind of energy for it to manifest and to show up and to be able to come into dreams and be able to do physical things. So, and that's probably what happened. You know, you have your little sister who was of innocence, who kids can't, they don't know how to protect themselves. Like I told you guys, you don't know how, because it's something that you're just, what is it? What are we doing here? And then you have your dad who's a machismo, you know, doesn't have the belief. And as a son, you're like, yeah, you know, can't be really with dad and everything, can't be doing that with mom, can't be, no, you didn't see it. And so there's that energy in that house where it's like you're stressed because dad doesn't believe it, mom doesn't want to talk about it, I'm experiencing it, I feel alone, I feel isolated, what do we do? And that kind of energy alone is what feeds a type of manifestation. They feed off of a very certain frequency. And the stronger that energy, the stronger it is that they feed off of it. And so isolation, despair, hopelessness, stress, feeling really caged, it's a perfect environment for something like that to show up. So whatever it is, I can't say if it was a person or I can't say if it was something more. But what I can say is it manifests because there's that energy in the house that it could feed off of. And that's what they want, essentially. It's the easiest to feed off of rather than good vibes, being grateful, having all this faith. You know, that's why they're probably coming to your mom in dreams, but coming to you guys in the physical. So like they can move in different planes. But it's interesting that your mom was even like, okay, we're gonna go to war. I've seen you now, you know, and sometimes it takes that, but I can't tell you what it is. I could tell you that the environment you had was the reason it was manifesting more and more.
Fuck, I was hoping you would say it wasn't demonic. Because everyone that I've talked to, my good friend JJ, I've talked to Father Birdsong, who's an exorcist in Georgia, who's actually gotten physically hurt practicing because he's encountered some crazy stuff. Sounds demonic. I was hoping you were gonna say
No,
it's not.
I can't make the assertion because like even malevolent people,
Right.
right? Malevolent humans,
Hide their intentions.
yeah, they have bad intentions. You know, I'm more afraid of people for a reason than spirits.
You know about that story, right, Chris? Like there was like a 14th century group of villagers who just started dancing, and some of them started dying, and they were like dancing for like a month, and it was just like completely random. The village leads like thought it was demonic. They thought it was like some kind of like punishment, and people were just dancing for a month in the 1400s or 1300s or whatever it was. Like they just started dying from dancing for like a month, and there was no explanation to this day as to why that happened. If I can take it back real quick, the last thing I'll say is there are three aspects to human existence from our perspective that we have to consider when we talk about this stuff. One, people lie. Two, people have experiences that they can't explain. Three, there are people who have experiences, but they are so enamored and focused on regular human life that they don't want to admit it. So you can take that spectrum and you can talk about any amalgamation or mixture between those people. Like some people want to lie, some people want to get attention, some people just want to be left alone, some people want to tell the truth. If you have to ask my honest opinion, like that's why it's so fucking hard. It's so effing hard to be a human being, because not only are you dealing with the BS of other people's stuff, you're also dealing with the BS of your own personal stuff, which is like, yeah, sometimes I want to tell the truth. Like I want to tell the truth because I have people I love, or I want to be felt accepted or whatever. But then you also, some people want to throw in lies to emphasize that feeling that they're going to be accepted. So some people tell lies about whether or not they experience something, but some people are like genuinely honest, like, oh, I experienced this, I need to tell people about it, and therefore that will get me acceptance. So there's almost always like an underlying driving factor between any existence that wants to feel something or get some kind of output. And that's what scares the absolute shit out of me about reality, is like we all have our own personal things, but there's also an aspect that we want to do the right thing or have the right outcome. And so you have to ask, like, well, why do we have the right outcome? Is it God? Is it some positive force that's not God in the universe? But like I know that was a lot, but like what's your final take on that, Riley?
For me, the God of truth always wins. You know, gnosis, lived experiences, a knowing, like between me and Chris, we've experienced something. Your daughter and us have experienced something, right? And that's a lived experience. That's a type of gnosis. Okay. That speaks volumes. That's just what it is. If people haven't lived it, they're not going to know the truth. But people who have, they know it's there, they know it exists. And at the end of the day, that's really all that matters. Whether people are lying, you know what? They're gonna exist. Clout chasers are gonna exist. All right. But those that know it's there and know it's real. And I think we are spiritual beings, guys, living a human experience to understand each other, to understand why we're here to begin with. And it's just that's what it is. And you learn it through lived experiences. Being a dad is a lived experience that only you and other dads know about, right? Like it's a feeling that I haven't experienced yet, right? But it's going to be there for me one day. And until I'm there, I'll never actually know what it's like to look at my first born, you know? But I've heard the stories from all these dads and all these moms, my mom, my dad, they're like, there's nothing like it. Wait until it happens to you. And I'm like, I'll never know it because I haven't. When you know, you know. That's what I'm trying to get at. So the God of truth
Oh,
is that knowing. It's that lived experience we all have.
I had a professor tell me one time, and I had never heard this quote before, but after I heard it all the time. And it was like, for those who know, no explanation is needed. For those that don't know, no explanation is possible. And when I first heard that from my professor years and years ago, I'm like, well, shit, that's kind of like dark, right? It's like, well, that sounds like an obfuscation of the truth. Like, if you know something, you don't want anybody else to know about it because you're the only one who can understand it. But really, what that quote means at the core is through experience. So you can spend all day. I can spend all day or multiple days or a month trying to explain to you, Riley, like what it's like to have a daughter. And even though you are receptive to the idea of having a child or a daughter or a son or whatever, like there's no way for you to fully experience it unless you actually live it.
Right. There's not that understanding. Like I can understand like there's a love deeper, but I don't know that love.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so
And
there's
you yeah. And there's people who may or may not want that love. Like you sound like you want that love, which is great.
right.
And I pray for you. Like I like good things for you to experience that because like there's nothing like it. Like I'm not trying to get sentimental, but like my daughter in my life has been not only the greatest challenge in balancing the rest of the degrees of my life, like work and education and self-preservation, all that stuff. Not only has it been that, but it's also been the most amazing retrospective beautiful moment in my life where I wake up every day. Like you guys don't have kids, so you can't imagine this, but like I wake up sometimes and if my daughter's at school, she's at preschool, I want to watch videos of her from when she's 3 years old.
My
And
mom
like that.
thing, she's like,
Okay.
we don't
Same
understand
thing.
stress. Like, and then when she grows up and gets out of the house, my mom and my stepdad, they're like, you don't understand the underlying stress we have when we can't see you
Yeah.
every day. Like,
Oh
it's
my God.
you guys don't understand, and we live with it every single day. And I'm like, well,
Yes.
you
Yeah.
know, my
Yeah.
siblings, we all joined the military, and so we are work, and we all serve
Right.
the country. And so I'm like, so when you're like, I want to watch my daughter, you know, because she's at school. My parents want the same thing. They want to sit there and be like, we want to see you guys every second of every day to make sure you're okay, that everything's good. So, and that's funny because like my parents have had us, right? And then you've had that, and it's that knowing and that lived experience, that same thing. And that's what I say. God of truth is simply that lived experience. And when you tell me the truth, you don't need to explain yourself. You don't need to. It stands as it is. Those that try to explain themselves, they kind of look like fools. It's like you're trying too hard. But if you know it's true, then don't try at all. Just let it exist as it is.
Let it be. Yeah. And here's the extra emphasis on what you said, which is there is okay, so I totally admit that as a parent, there's a degree of fear, right? There's a degree that I want to preserve my genes or whatever. Like I totally admit that that's a scientific standpoint. That's a scientific argument that I want to just keep my genes going. That's the underlying. I know we're getting super deep in this podcast, which is great. I fucking love it. What's your take on that? Why is there the animalistic side? Why is there the human side? Is there a spiritual argument there, or is there just an amalgamation of like what's going on there?
So evolution, we have multiple brains, right? We know we got like 2 or 3 brains. Like our reptilian brain is like our most primal. This is, our desire to, like our need to eat, sleep, shelter, reproducing. These are basic, right? And then as evolution kind of goes over time, we've had other brains. And so what would drive you to preserve your genes? Love. That creating those chemicals over time. Love is a relationship. It's a chemical we know of, but it's also a relationship that allows people to focus on their child, so that way that child has a better chance of growing up and continuing to pass that gene. It's all something like evolution, but there is a spiritual aspect to love. There definitely is, because it's when you feel it and you know it, there's just a connection that only you and the person you love, your wife, both your wives, there's just something there that God, you look at your wife and you're like, God put her in my life and I've become a better man because of my wife. And, I was married once, I understand what it's like to be married and be that, but it's like women are spiritual beings that are here to help us go and ascend and to understand God and to understand our inner world better, because we're material. We provide, we protect, we look at the nice cars, we look at our paychecks, we look at all these things, but women, it's just a different world with women. It's completely different. They'll bring up things that you didn't even think of, and then they're right. Like, I don't know how, they're just right most of the time. And it's just a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful spiritual alchemy between men and women.
All 3 of us are male. The balance between the two, testosterone and estrogen, drives a lot of our self-being, right?
Mhm.
So not only that, but we also have this foundation of society that's built off of estrogen, built off of testosterone, and whether or not you fall into one category historically or another, that drives us as people in so many ways. Like if I'm walking through my daily life, I'm married, right? Because the spiritual aspect of the connection of my wife is way, way better than
Right.
anything that I could ever get spiritually or physically. Sorry.
Well, I want to just make a correction. I was actually born female. I'm a trans guy.
Okay.
Yeah. Because I'm truthful. I don't like lying.
Right.
It's just a medical condition. It's not something you typically share. But I don't want people to see this and be like, oh, well, he's a trans guy, and
Right.
I like being truthful. But it is the testosterone, if I'm being honest. Like
Yes.
7 years
Please.
of being on it, the brain it's so simple. I wish I try to explain this to my sisters. It's so simple. It's like boxes, like lines. Like nothing crisscrosses, nothing. It's
Yep.
not like spaghetti. It's like the noodles in the box before they go into the water. Understanding, I don't say I have male experiences. I say I parallel you guys. So when I say that, it's like I've had these experiences, I've had these thoughts, and I'll talk to my dad, I'll talk to my brothers, And they're like, no, that's what it's like, you know. And it's just like the testosterone and the estrogen really have us doing different things and focusing on different things. And that's just how nature just designed it, you know, because it's all useful in its own way. I've known since I was a kid something was off. So think of it like plugging one jack in and putting another jack, you know, and or like putting the best fuel. You know, now my brain kind of operates in a way that I've always known, but never
Sure.
felt, because again, it's that understanding. It's like, I know there's something there. I just haven't felt it yet. And now that I've felt it, I'm like, okay, yeah, this is what I've known in there this whole time.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it's an interesting thing. You know, I feel for you guys, honestly,
Yeah.
because the stuff you guys have because of the testosterone. I mean, it's for guys, I mean, they look at you guys, they're like, no way, you guys are that simple. And I'm like, honestly, guys say what they mean, and they show through their actions. It's really that simple for men. Like it's genuinely that simple.
So, Riley, thank you so much for being on the show today. I know we've been going for a little bit over an hour now, close to an hour 20. So, I want to wrap up with one final question for you today. For the people that consume your content and consume my content, listen to the podcast, follow you on TikTok, follow me on TikTok, that want to, for lack of better words, get into the paranormal in the sense that, hey, I know I kind of experienced some stuff, or I'm kind of interested in that. What would you say to those people that were kind of skeptical or were on the fence of coming over to this side of the paranormal and exploring spirituality, ghosts, and all that stuff? Like, what advice would you give to those people as you being a fellow person that experienced hauntings and all that other stuff?
Knowledge doesn't hurt. It's free. It's there. If you are interested, read about it. If you're not, I mean, it doesn't hurt you to know. It really doesn't. So I think that's where I stand on that. Knowledge doesn't hurt. Expand your thinking, expand your world, and you'll see. You'll see. You are what you think about. But on that note, I would tell people to be careful too, because once you start seeing and opening up your eyes, then you'll start actually seeing and seeing things that you can't explain. So always use precautions when you're jumping into it.
Well said, man. I completely agree. Always be careful, always protect yourself. And if you
That's
plan on going in paranormal investigating or something like that, always have protection because you don't
always.
know what's going to follow you home.
And take Chris along so he can
No.
experience the
No, I am the last person that you want to take along because I don't want to deal with that shit ever again. Ever
pee
again.
pants and shit pants and you don't want to
The
deal
whole
with
nine. I will run out screaming like a little child. But Riley, thank you again for being a
Thanks, guys.
guest on today's show. We hope we didn't traumatize you today and you had a
No,
good time.
I definitely appreciate you guys having me on, and the respect and the inquiry. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. So why don't you tell our listeners where they could find you on social media? I know
Okay.
you said that you were working on a podcast and some other projects
Yeah.
coming up.
Just TikTok, Ghosts with an S in the Castle, you know, Riley Castle. So Ghost in the Castle on TikTok. That's where you can find me. For now, and once my podcast and Patreon go up, it would be the same thing, Ghosts in the Castle.
You heard him, folks. Go ahead, give him a follow on TikTok. And when he launches his podcast on and Patreon, I'll be sure to promote those on my TikTok page as well. Listeners, I hope you enjoyed today's show. I hope you enjoyed listening to Riley. If he is up for it, we would love to have him back on. I feel like there's so many more avenues of discussion
yes, please come
that
back on, Riley. I swear.
we could go down. Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you would like to be on the show like Riley was today, to share your paranormal experiences or thoughts on the paranormal, just shoot us an email, shoot us a message on social media. We love interfacing with the community. We like creating what we call a paranormal safe space, kind of like a therapy type session. So whatever you experience, just let it out. Judgment free zone. We love talking to you. Thanks again. Thanks for tuning into today's episode of The Wandering Road. You can find us on Apple, Google, Spotify, and most podcast platforms. Be sure to subscribe and share. Also, don't forget to give a follow on Instagram at twroadpodcast and follow my TikTok at twrpodcast. Take care, and I'll catch you on the next one.